A little teaser here. Let's talk bargains. You got two bargains you're going to talk about, and there's a lot more bargains in the guide than this, but we're going to give you two. We're going to talk Evan Ingram. We're going to talk Will Fuller. So let's talk about them right now. Let's go to Ingram first.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure to pick two names, especially for our longtime listeners that we might have not talked about as much on this podcast. Some of the names in that guide will be recurring guys. You can probably guess who they are already if you're an avid listener of the podcast, with tons of new information about those guys nonetheless. But Ingram, a guy that I'm absolutely in love with because in general, the tight end position, and we talk about bargains too. I just want to preface this. We're not talking about really late round guys. Those are what we call penny stocks. After 120 or so ADP is where we get into the penny stock range. And there's tons of tight ends loaded in that range. But otherwise, you're either paying a fair price, like getting Gronk at the end of round 2 or so, or you're getting Kelsey, round 3, Ertz late round 3. You're paying a good fair price for a elite guy, or otherwise I don't really like the price you're paying for any of these tight ends. Ingram's the one guy I look at as a bargain, a guy that is going later than he should, but I think offers that tight end one locked in upside for a cheaper price than what you had to pay to get an Ertz or a Kelsey. He's going to be this year's Ertz is my kind of prediction about it, that you get him at that lower price and he explodes and joins that tier next year. And after last year's, the tight end 5 already as a rookie at the hardest position to translate to, 64 catches, 722 yards, 6 TDs, already had a great year and has come out and said the game's slowed down a ton for me right now. Everybody from camp, whether it's Saquon Barkley saying I played with Gesicki at Penn State and this guy's just even more freakish. Eli Apple, their top cornerback, is saying he's damn near uncoverable. The situations they put him in and the way they have him run routes. That's what I'm loving so much about him. The target share might go down. In fact, it will. He's facing now Odell Beckham's coming back. You got Saquon Barkley now. We know how Shermer loves to target his running backs. So the volume is going to go down a bit for Ingram. He was second among tight ends last year with 115 targets. He probably won't see that wave, but what I think is going to happen is that quality of those targets is going to go up so much more because Shermer, just like Eli Apple said, is going to put him in so many unique situations. He's been moved all around the formation, according to a beat writer who in that we're actually have on the podcast, I believe next week. His name's Dan Shiner, and he's been down at every practice saying they're moving Evan Ingram all over the field, being used on different route depths. He's lined up at Z receiver, all 3 wide receivers in the trips. He's been moved to all 3 different positions. And this guy, Dan Schneider, the reason I reached out to him to get him on, he said Evan Ingram's been the best offensive player on the field. And that's, again, a field with Barkley, a field with Odell on it. He's saying Ingram's been that impressive. And all other reports are saying, too, he's been Eli Manning's go-to guy, the most targeted option through 20 practices this year, including the mini camps, including OTAs and now training camp. He remains his most targeted guy, and that's with Odell Beckham. I know he's getting worked in and maybe a little bit slower, so you got to take it with a little bit of grain of salt. But big plays every practice, one-handed catches against linebackers and D-backs can't match up with his size or speed. This guy's a freak. He's going at pick 60 right now. I have him up at 48 in my rankings, and I think he's a clear, absolute bargain steal at the tight end position. And last thing I'll say, Nat, on that too is there's so many bargains. If you read this guide, you'll find out at the wide receiver position that you've had those years where you just flounder at tight end. You're constantly rotating crap like Cameron Brate. You remember how often I wanted to fucking murder that guy last year, how many times we shit on him, and I talked about how he'd be the guy I'd punch in the face if I could punch anyone in the face.
Yes, and I said, do you remember who mine was?
Fuck, who was yours? No, tell me again.
Eric Decker.
Oh, of course it was Eric Decker. That's right. He just spit a loogie right in his face. Ingram will give you that stability that you don't have to have that shitty fucking rotation. It's going to cost you a 5th-round pick or so, but you've already had the chance to go 2 running backs, 2 receivers like we preach, and then you lock up Evan Ingram. I think it's a great strategy because of how many good receivers are available late. I love the value you're getting on him.
All right, Will Fuller. The ADP, average draft position for this guy is 72. He generally goes at wide receiver 28. The so-called experts have him at 91 overall, 38th wide receiver. The Wolf has him at 62 overall, 27th wide receiver. So as far as the ADP goes, they're right around the same. The Wolf has him 10 spots higher overall.
So higher, yeah.
Well, you have him 10 spots higher. That's significant. And you got him about 2.5 rounds higher than the experts. Talk to us about Will Fuller. Sell us on him.
I'll sell you on him by kind of selling you the offense of the Texans last year. And again, is it due for regression? I get that. But listen to these stats. It's absolutely insanity here. When Watson, Hopkins, and Fuller were all on the field together, which was only 4 games last year, the Texans averaged 40.5 points per game. Watson threw 14 of his 19 touchdowns when he had all three of those guys on the field together. 7 apiece, or 7 to Fuller, 6 to Hopkins. And when they were at home for those 3 games, Watson threw 12 of those touchdown passes. And then you look at Fuller's stats specifically, he had 13 catches for 279 of his ultimate 423 yards on the season, with 7 of those touchdowns in only 4 games. That's for those counting at home, 1,116 yard, 28 TD pace for Will Fuller. Is he going to actually match that pace? No, of course not. But I don't think it's going to regress so hard as everybody's saying, to the point that he's now suddenly a nobody. It's as if
he could score a third that many touchdowns and still be an extremely viable fantasy receiver.
Exactly.
A third.
Exactly. So, right? You know what I mean? And I don't think the touchdowns, yes, it's fluky to have that many, over half his catches went for touchdowns under Watson. Yes, that's a little bit fluky. I get it. But ultimately, that happened because he's such a good deep burner. He excels at getting behind the defense. That's what Coach O'Brien says about this guy, is nobody gets behind the defense as good as Will Fuller, and we're going to just keep using that to our fullest advantage. It's not like they're going to suddenly become this non-vertical attack. And Watson buys time so well in the pocket and can just sling the ball so well on the run. Flick of the wrist, it goes flying down the field. It's perfect for Fuller. He's not going to be able to see, you can't put a safety over him and Hopkins, so he often draws weaker coverage that he can just destroy on his own. He blazes a 4.28 40, one of the fastest guys in the NFL. Bulked up a little bit. We talked about this a couple episodes ago. So maybe that's the one concern with him, is his durability. Maybe this helps him actually stay healthier. The wide receiver coach has noted he's running a more full route tree because of the added size. He's been absolutely burning people in practice. The quote was blowing past defenders every single day. And O'Brien said he's a huge part of what we're trying to do. So it's not like he's going to suddenly disappear. They're going to continue to be a very aggressive attack. I don't see why this offense would suddenly, yes, the touchdown rate will go down a little bit, but ultimately I think he's still going to destroy his ADP, or his expert, especially his expert consensus ranking at 90. There's so much upside here. Even if he only lasts 10 games or so, you got to make sure you invest in this guy. You got to get a piece of that Texans offense, and this is the cheapest way to do so, I would say.